So imagine your home's air conditioner quietly negotiating a crypto contract with your neighbor's rooftop solar panels, and not next week or tomorrow, but
Yeah.
in real time, completely on its own while you sleep.
I mean, it sounds like total science fiction, right? But it's actually the very real, rapidly approaching frontier of how we handle power. Because, for over a century, electricity has been this ultimate one-way street.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
just sit at the end of a very long, very fragile wire, passively consuming power that's generated by some massive plant miles away. And then, well, we just wait to pay a bill at the end of the month.
Right, it's totally invisible to you. You flick a switch, the light comes on, and somewhere far away, a meter ticks up. We don't really think about the journey of that power.
Huh.
But today's deep dive is taking us into a totally different paradigm. We're looking at a stack of research centered around a technology called Hedera, and specifically how they're tokenizing microgrid energy infrastructure.
Which is a huge shift.
It really is. The mission for you listening today is to understand how we are literally merging the unforgiving physical laws of electricity with the mathematical certainty of digital ledgers.
And by doing that, we're really stepping away from that fragile, centralized legacy system. I mean, we are moving toward a decentralized, highly resilient power infrastructure where electricity isn't just a utility you blindly consume. It's becoming a digital asset, moving and trading at the literal speed of light.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the materials throw us right into the deep end with this idea of transforming volatile electrons into immutable ledger entries. And they're doing this by using something called the Hedera Consensus Service to anchor microgrid telemetry.
Right.
Now, my immediate thought is trying to track volatile electrons. It sounds like trying to individually barcode drops of water in a flowing river. I mean, how does anchoring microgrid telemetry to an immutable ledger actually solve this? Electricity doesn't just sit in a warehouse, it's chaotic.
Well, the river analogy is actually a great starting point because it highlights the fundamental problem with energy, right? It's generated, and then it must be consumed almost instantaneously.
Yeah, there's no waiting around.
Exactly. That is why the research refers to them as volatile electrons. They are inherently unstable because they exist in a state of constant motion. You mathematically and physically cannot put a literal barcode on an electron.
So if we can't barcode the water, what is the telemetry actually doing? Is it like putting thousands of microscopic sensors in the river to tell us how fast the water is flowing or how deep it is at a specific microsecond?
Yeah, that is a very solid way to visualize it. I mean, telemetry is just the automated process of taking continuous, highly precise measurements of that moving river and transmitting the data. If we ground this in a modern microgrid, which is essentially a localized neighborhood of power sources,
Yeah.
think about what that looks like.
Okay, like a normal suburban street.
Right. You have solar panels on roofs, electric vehicles in driveways acting as giant mobile batteries, smart thermostats turning air conditioners on and off.
So if a cloud passes over my house for, say, 30 seconds, my solar output drops, but my neighbor across the street might still be in direct sunlight.
Exactly that. Power is flowing in every direction, constantly shifting as appliances cycle and the weather changes. It's just a massive, chaotic web of supply and demand data.
But here is where I get stuck. Measuring the river is one thing, but the research says they are anchoring this telemetry to an immutable ledger using that Hedera Consensus Service. How does recording a measurement solve the problem of actually managing the power?
Well, because before you can manage or trade that power, you need an absolute unhackable record of truth. Imagine if, instead of just measuring the river, you took a high-speed, time-stamped photograph of the entire river every single millisecond.
Okay, a super fast photograph.
Right. And then you handed that photograph to 1,000 independent judges who all had to instantly review it.
Ah, so that's the decentralized consensus part. We aren't just relying on one guy with a clipboard at the central power company to say what happened. We have a whole network of independent computers nodes simultaneously looking at that exact same data.
Yes, and those nodes all have to agree mathematically, like, yes, this is exactly where every drop of water was and exactly who produced and consumed it at 12:00 baud 001. Once those nodes agree, they create a cryptographic seal on that data. That becomes your immutable ledger entry.
Wow. So it instantly freezes the chaotic physical reality of the grid into absolute digital certainty.
It does. I mean, no single entity controls it, but everyone on the network can trust it completely.
That completely changes how I was visualizing this. We're taking incredibly precise measurements of electrons flowing through the system and cementing those measurements into a distributed ledger so securely that we can actually treat the data itself as if it were the physical electron. We've effectively captured lightning on a ledger.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And once you establish that undeniable truth, you've built the foundation for a fully functioning decentralized market.
Okay, but if we are successfully turning physical energy into digital data, my next thought is, well, how do I actually use that data to power my house? Because data doesn't run a refrigerator. And I think this connects to the next major concept in the research, mapping real-time kilowatt consumption to fractionalized tokens.
Yeah.
And this is supposedly to enable autonomous peer-to-peer energy trading.
Yes, this is where the architecture transitions from just being a secure record keeper to an active, living ecosystem.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let me try to reason through this, because when I hear fractionalized, my mind immediately goes to finance, like taking a $20 bill and breaking it into digital pennies for microtransactions. But a standard unit of energy on my utility bill is a whole kilowatt hour. Are we taking a single kilowatt and slicing it up so neighbors can trade it?
What's fascinating here is you're hitting on the critical issue of scale. A whole kilowatt is a massive, clunky denomination when you're dealing with real-time microfluctuations.
It's too big.
Way too big. Think back to that typical afternoon in our neighborhood microgrid. Your solar panels might generate a tiny excess of power for just a few seconds when the sun peeks out from behind that cloud. Or your refrigerator compressor kicks on for a fraction of a minute.
Oh, I see. It's like trying to buy a single stick of gum with a $100 bill. But the store doesn't have change, and the transaction has to happen in half a second. A whole kilowatt is just too big to be useful for those tiny micro moments.
Precisely. So by mapping that real-time consumption to fractionalized tokens, the system creates a digital currency that perfectly mirrors the physical reality of the grid. Every tiny fluctuation in energy supply and demand is represented by a fraction of a token on the Hedera network.
Okay, so we have the digital change to buy the gum. We have the currency size correctly. But I want to push back on how this trading actually happens. The research specifically highlights that this process enables autonomous peer-to-peer trading.
But why does it need to be autonomous? I mean, why can't we just trade whole kilowatts manually? If I have extra solar power, why can't I just list it on an app, like an eBay for electricity?
Right, like someone down the street sees your excess, they click buy, and the power routes to them.
Yeah. Why doesn't that work?
You would think a simple marketplace app would work, but physics simply will not allow that. By the time someone opens an app, sees your excess power, and clicks buy, that specific electron is long gone.
Oh, because the electricity doesn't sit in an escrow account waiting for the transaction to clear. It has to be used the exact millisecond it's generated. Exactly. That is the core flaw in trying to apply legacy financial thinking to a physical energy grid. Human beings, and even traditional centralized clearinghouses, cannot react fast enough. If you introduce a middleman, even a digital middleman, who has to verify the math, approve the transaction, and then manually route the power, you introduce friction.
And in the few seconds it takes for that centralized system to say, yes, neighbor A is approved to sell to neighbor B, the cloud has moved, the solar panel output has dropped, and the entire physical state of the grid has changed again.
The physics of electricity do not wait for bureaucratic approval. That's why the autonomous nature is non-negotiable. The smart contracts on the ledger have to execute the trades autonomously. They are constantly looking at the telemetry data, seeing who is producing and who is consuming, and instantly matching a fraction of a token to a fraction of a kilowatt.
So the fractionalized tokens aren't just an accounting trick to settle up at the end of the month. They are the actual mechanism routing the power. The smart contract makes the trade happen instantly between peers, and the power flows. No utility company playing referee.
Right. It completely democratizes the distribution of energy, removing the central authority and letting the network balance itself based on preset parameters.
That realization brings up a massive logistical hurdle, though, because if the tokens are literally routing the physical power, the system facilitating those trades has to be incredibly fast. The research states that to build a decentralized, resilient power infrastructure, we have to bypass legacy bottlenecks to achieve sub-second finality.
Yes, the speed of the ledger becomes a matter of physical safety, not just convenience.
And I really need to clarify this for you listening, because sub-second finality sounds like a nice-to-have tech feature, not a strict requirement. I mean, I can wait a day for a bank transfer to clear or a few minutes for a crypto transaction. Why is sub-second finality so strictly necessary here? If a transaction takes, say, 2 seconds to finalize on the grid, does the whole thing break down?
This highlights the fundamental difference between financial ledgers and physical infrastructure ledgers. I mean, if your bank transfer takes an extra day, it's annoying. You might get an overdraft fee, but the banking system doesn't physically catch on fire.
Right. The worst that happens is I get an angry email from my landlord.
But the power grid is a physical machine. It is arguably the largest, most complex physical machine ever built by humanity. For it to operate safely, the amount of power being generated must perfectly, exactly match the amount of power being consumed at every single moment. We measure this delicate balance in frequency, typically 60 hertz in North America.
I've always heard that 60 hertz number, but what does it actually mean in practice? Like, what happens if the ledger is lagging and the frequency gets out of balance because we are producing slightly more power than we are consuming?
So think of the appliances in your home. The motors in your refrigerator, your washing machine, they are physically designed to spin at a speed dictated by that exact 60 hertz frequency. If demand suddenly outstrips supply, or supply outstrips demand, that frequency drops or spikes. And if it gets out of balance by even a tiny margin for more than a few seconds, physical equipment starts to fail.
Wait, really? You mean the appliances themselves break?
The appliances, yes, but more dangerously, the grid infrastructure itself. Transformers can overheat and literally blow up. Protective relays on the power lines will sense the frequency anomaly and trip, forcefully shutting down entire sections of the grid to prevent catastrophic damage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that is the physical reality behind rolling blackouts. The grid is incredibly unforgiving.
That's terrifying. So if the ledger managing the trades takes 2 seconds to confirm that my solar panel just sent power to your AC unit, the physical grid might already be melting down because the supply and demand weren't matched fast enough.
Now you see why legacy bottlenecks are so dangerous. In the traditional grid, we manage this 60 hertz balance using massive physical spinning turbines at huge centralized power plants. Think of a freight train moving at 60 miles per hour.
Okay.
If it hits a small hill, the train doesn't instantly stop. The sheer mass and momentum keep it moving forward. That is what those giant metal turbines do. They provide a physical buffer, which is called inertia.
So if there's a sudden spike in demand, the sheer momentum of those heavy spinning turbines keeps the frequency stable for a few moments while the centralized control room manually ramps up power generation. They act like giant shock absorbers for the grid.
That is a perfect visualization. But in a decentralized microgrid where power is coming from hundreds of small rooftop solar panels, wind turbines, and home batteries, you do not have those massive spinning turbines. You've lost your physical shock absorbers.
Oh, man. That is the missing piece right there.
Yeah.
If we don't have the heavy metal turbines to absorb the shocks, we have to manage the balance entirely with data.
Exactly. And that data must move as fast as the physical effects of the electricity itself. The math itself has to become the buffer. If the distributed ledger you're using to coordinate all these small producers and consumers takes 2 minutes or even 2 seconds to achieve consensus, the grid frequency will drift, the protective systems will trip, and the entire microgrid will collapse into darkness.
That is wild to think about.
Yeah.
We're talking about replacing giant, rotating physical turbines with a decentralized network of cryptographic consensus. The speed of the ledger literally replaces thousands of tons of spinning metal.
It's the only way this architecture works. Distributed ledgers built on older, first-generation blockchain architectures where blocks take minutes to mine and confirm could never handle this.
They're just too slow.
They mathematically cannot provide the throughput or the speed required to manage a physical real-time power grid. Bypassing legacy bottlenecks means abandoning both the old utility control rooms and the slow blockchains in favor of a consensus mechanism that can operate in fractions of a second.
That completely reframes the idea of a resilient power infrastructure for me. Resilience isn't just about having stronger power lines or trimming trees near the holes. It's about having a digital ledger fast enough to perfectly balance supply and demand without needing a central authority.
Exactly.
So if a tree does fall on a power line or a neighborhood battery suddenly fails, the ledger adjusts the flow of fractionalized tokens in sub-seconds, routing power around the damage autonomously before the frequency even has a chance to drop.
It is a profound shift from centralized physical control to decentralized digital orchestration. It changes our entire relationship with energy, moving us from passive dependency to active participation.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? We started with a chaotic flow of volatile electrons acting like a raging river.
Right.
We explored how taking millisecond perfect, decentralized snapshots of that telemetry anchors it as immutable data on a ledger using Hedera infrastructure.
You did.
And we saw how those measurements are sliced into fractionalized tokens, allowing autonomous smart contracts to route power instantly. And most importantly, we learned that bypassing legacy bottlenecks and replacing the physical momentum of massive turbines with the digital speed of sub-second finality is the absolute requirement to keep the grid from physically failing.
Which means you are no longer just sitting at the end of a fragile wire waiting for the utility company to send you a bill.
Right. In this resilient, decentralized network, your home, your electric vehicle, your smart thermostat, they all become active, participating nodes in a living, breathing, autonomous energy market.
Which brings us to a final thought I would love for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. If physical electricity is effectively transformed into instantly tradable, fractionalized digital tokens, and your home is managing this all autonomously, what happens to the very concept of the power company?
That's a huge question.
If your own house eventually becomes an autonomous day trader, independently buying and selling its own fractionalized solar kilowatts to your neighbors while you sleep, do we even need a utility bill anymore? Or does the power grid simply become a giant illuminated financial market pulsing silently through the walls of your own home?
Now that is a thought to leave the lights on for.
Yeah.